This is the Times of India Health Plus podcast. It's where we explore specially curated conversations, wellness trends, and lifestyle tips from the TOI newsroom. Stay informed, stay healthy.
Hi, I'm Srirupa Ray, and I'm back as your host for yet another riveting podcast. This one's on snacking. Yes, those mindless munchies that we keep having all day long, and how it really messes with our bodies, causing sugar spikes and crashes, bloating, belly fat, and metabolic fatigue. I know what you're thinking. Doesn't frequent small bites actually boost our metabolism? Well, that's the myth we're here to bust. And to do that, we have with us today our expert, Tanya Malik Chawla, a clinical nutritionist, biohacking coach, and nutrigenomics researcher from Delhi. Chawla specializes in how food interacts with genes, metabolic biology, and functional medicine. Let's hear it from her. Welcome to the podcast, Tanya. So glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Srirupa. Very excited to be here.
Great. So tell me, Tanya, do you like snacking? I mean, I love snacking. But is snacking all the time bad for your health? And if yes, then how bad is it?
Okay, this is actually quite a loaded question, right? So, answering the first one, do I like snacking? All of us love snacking.
Oh, yes.
There is something about the comfort of eating, right? And I think that's where I want to start because we usually think about emotional eating. We think when we are sad, we are eating. But a lot of times I see in myself and also people I work with, even when we are happy and excited, we reach out for food, right? Food is almost a language of every emotion now. And if you think about it, what happens every time we snack is that there is a glucose release, which is triggering the reward hormone, right? Dopamine, we've all heard of it.
Correct.
Now that's almost like a reward. So the process of eating is not just the taste and sort of maybe a shared meal with a loved one or a friend. It's also that reward system that is making us reach out for more food.
Hmm.
So to answer your question, yes, I do definitely enjoy a snack here and there, but we are not grazing animals. If you think about it, I like to use this analogy that the nature has made us a certain way. And if you look at the nature around us, every animal is different. Like a lion will eat maybe once in 3, 4 days and then give the system that rest to be able to utilize the nutritions, do the digestion, and then just kind of live its life. A bear will eat for 3, 6 months and then really just not eat. We know the hibernation process.
Right.
But then you have the goats and you have the cows who are consistently grazing. That's because their systems are made that way. They are meant to be grazing constantly on sort of nibbling the greens that they nibble. We are not made like that. We are not meant to be grazing. We are more like, let's say, the lion, where we should be eating a substantial meal and then giving our body that time. Our liver, pancreas, gut, everything requires a break. So, very simply answering the second part of your question, no, constant eating is definitely not good for our health. And unfortunately, that's a pattern that all of us have got stuck in.
But first, let's get to the root of the thing. Why do we snack? I mean, it's not always like we are hungry or something. It
For
like
sure.
stress or boredom, or sometimes it's also a habit, like when we need to munch something.
You've answered the question to quite an extent yourself, right? It's definitely habit driven. It's become part of a culture almost. If you see the way that we've progressed, and then everything that makes our life so much easier, like all of the quick commerce or the apps that we have that can get food to our doorstep instantly, while they're great and they're helpful to a large extent, they've only fed this cycle where habitual eating, sipping on something is something that's become part of our day-to-day lives.
Right.
But you know what, where I want to deep dive is, a lot of us usually, even when people come to me with this being a consistent problem, they think it's a problem of discipline. That, I don't have self control, or, maybe I'm not as disciplined as I should be. And what I recognize is it is not a problem of discipline. What's actually happening, and I want to put this sort of as a bucket, because I see that majority of the people are overfeeding but malnourished.
Ah.
Right? And I want to deep dive in this a little bit, because what is happening when we are consistently eating, we understand that the process of feeding, or the calories and the sort of nutrients that we think is going in the system, are out of balance. Calories are high, but the actual nourishment that our body requires, from that standpoint, we are malnourished. Now, every time I use the word malnourished, and this is funny because when I'm working with somebody who typically comes to me when they're overweight, right? And then I tell them, listen, you're malnourished. And they look at me with a blank face. They're, excuse me, I'm trying to lose 10 kgs over here and you're telling me I'm malnourished. But when I open the blood markers and I show them what I mean, patterns that I usually see, we are low on protein, almost in a catabolic state where the body is eating itself. We are low, and this is a fabulous pattern that I've seen in women specifically above 35 because the whole perimenopausal shift happens.
Oh,
Ferritin
yes.
levels are low, even if they're not anemic. So iron levels look fine, the hemoglobin looks fine, but ferritin levels, which is the actual reserve of your iron, has completely tanked. Hormones are out of balance. Of course, there is a transition that's
Right.
happening, but anabolic reserve is completely gone. Vitamin D, we have a lot of sunlight in our country, and yet majority, almost 90% of the people who come to me have absolutely chronically low vitamin D levels.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how we are unfortunately living indoors, but also we don't synthesize vitamin D so much. Now, the malnourishment is not something that goes hand in hand with how much food you're eating. And that distinction is important for us to understand. So, going back to why this is happening, one, because while we are overfed, we are malnourished, the body is consistently asking for nutrition. The body is asking for amino acids or protein, is asking for vitamins and minerals, but what we are giving it is all of the tasty foods that are easily available with the namkeens and the biscuits and the snacks. So we're giving it calories, but it's asking for nutrition, and this has become a vicious cycle that all of us are stuck in.
Right. So tell me, what is the usual Indian eating pattern? I mean, we have like 3 meals, 4 meals, and does it, have sort of some snacking in between? Do we have traditionally like?
So I think there are two lenses. One is the traditional Indian way of eating, and one is today's Indian way of eating. So if we talk about today's Indian way of eating, recently or not so recently, the ICMR Lancet study came out, right? The longitudinal study of how Indians or what Indians are eating.
Hmm.
And I love referring to this study because mostly when I talk about sort of our eating patterns, when you add a data point to it, it makes it a lot easier to be understood. So
Right.
this study in itself showed us that almost majority of us, if not each and every Indian, is chronically under eating protein, and more importantly, largely only eating carbs. So we're a very glucose heavy diet country. And we see this in other data points also. The health, the load on the health economy, we see that we are a country that's unfortunately the capital of diabetes. Metabolic syndrome is something that is literally in every case that I look at without people recognizing. And what do I mean by metabolic syndrome? Lipids are out of balance. High cholesterol, we talk about triglyceride levels are really, really high. There is a non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome because we don't recognize it. People come and tell me, I do everything right, I'm eating healthy, I am sort of not necessarily going out or drinking alcohol, why do I have a fatty liver? And then the third thing that we see is that the cardiovascular load, which usually we think is only our heart issue, is actually in the functional medicine realm known as the cardiometabolic issue, because all of these habits, the one that we're talking about today, which is binge eating or just constantly snacking or grazing, is feeding into all of these imbalances that are leading to the disease manifestations that we see in terms of numbers. Now, this study was actually quite a landmark study because it put into perspective that overall the eating habit of our country has actually become lopsided, where we are just glucose heavy,
Right.
right? And that is exactly what's happening. If you look at the snacks that we have, no, a lot of us, what are we nibbling on? We're nibbling on namkeens, we're nibbling on biscuits, we're nibbling on sometimes even samosas and kachoris, right? And or even homemade pakoras. Even when we think we're eating healthy, we are eating upma, poha. While they can be homemade and healthier, they're not necessarily a nourishing meal, because what are they missing? They're only giving you carbohydrates, they're
Correct.
not giving you protein, they are very very to a very small extent giving you vitamins and minerals. And that's what today's eating pattern is. If we go back a little to our ancestors, two things were different. One, our ancestors literally ate 2 meals a day, sometimes in some families maybe 3 meals a day. Second, we always have this argument when I talk about this. They say that, hey, listen, we've always been a carb heavy country. right? We've always had our parathas and our rice. And yes, we have, but our ancestors were largely in agriculture. They were farmers. The stories I hear from my grandparents about my great grandparents, they were in the farm almost the entire day. They used to go in the morning and be under the sunlight, and they didn't even have the technology our farmers have today, right? So they were doing everything physically. Imagine the amount of energy they were utilizing versus us. Even this conversation we are having sitting in the comforts of our home, and then I'm sure that at least for me there is something lying over here that I'm sipping on. So that's the huge difference.
Right, right. So, which brings me to my next question is, how many meals do you think an adult should ideally have? And should they be like big or small? Or what's your sort of ideal situation where, say, this number of meals are adequate for nourishment?
Right. So, one, I want to put a caveat before I answer this question. One, because from a functional medicine biohacking perspective, one of the most important things is bioindividuality. What works for me might not work for you, right? We're all not only from each other, is there a factor of individuality, but also time to time. For example, what worked for me in my 20s, I'm turning 40 in 2 weeks, is not going to work for me now, right? So things change, but our own biology changes. Each of us come from different backgrounds, we have a different genetic makeup. But if you look at the general sort of population, the kind of lifestyle that we are living today, fair to say that we are largely sedentary. Most of us are living in cities. We've kind of got a certain kind of infrastructure around it. So if I'm to create a general rule of thumb, I usually say a good, well balanced plate is enough if we have 3 meals a day, right? Your typical breakfast, lunch, dinner. But what is more important, and I often want to highlight this more, is as long as you're getting the total output from the standpoint of protein and micronutrients in a given day, even people who have a single meal, it's fine, right? But your total output, your actual amount of protein your body requires, the amount of vitamins and minerals your body requires, the amount of hydration and electrolytes your body requires, if you're taking care of that, it doesn't matter the number of meals that you're having. You can do it in 2 meals, you can do it in 3 meals. You definitely don't need 6 meals a day, right? But I also want to give a split, and this is purely from a functional medicine lens. From there's a cardiometabolic diet which is now very largely studied and known to be super healthy for our hearts and our metabolic health. And I think this is something all of us in India require, because you look at our genetic makeup, right? We are definitely more susceptible to getting insulin resistance, which is the precursor of diabetes. I've seen, and in fact, data shows that we get insulin resistance and even diabetes at a much lower BMI than Western population.
Correct.
So we'll actually not be overweight, but we will be insulin resistant. We also get lipid or sort of our high cholesterols and unfortunately heart issues at a much lower weight and a much lower BMI. So there is a genetic susceptibility which we should be countering. And I also want to put this out, right? While genes are only 10 to 15% of our health story, the rest 90-95% is epigenomics, or what we do with our lifestyle. But at the same time, knowing where the weaknesses and strengths lie are very important, because that's how we can then make those changes in our lifestyle.
Totally.
So this cardiometabolic diet says it should be a 30-30-40 rule. 30% protein, 30% healthy fats, not just fats, and 40% carbs. That's how your plate should be divided, which means every meal should be divided like that. Now, if you actually, and I often tell people I work with, and I'm going to tell you and the listeners the same thing, for the next 3 days, just 3 days, download any food tracker that gives you a macro split and just enter everything you eat. You will really get a perspective of how different your plate is. We often don't understand what we are doing, because when I talk to people and I'm like, you should get that much protein, you should get this much vitamins, you should get this much fat, they're like, more or less it is. And then I make them track for 3 days and they realize that they are no way close. Because it's about the perception. Unfortunately, I hope we were taught this in school, but we aren't. So we have to go through the process of learning ourselves. But again, to answer your question directly, ideally 3 meals a day. If you're somebody who thinks you're going to be very hungry and you can't stay away from food, but well proportioned, balanced meals. That's what's more important.
Right. So then tell me, if from 3 meals a day, if you're grazing like animals, what does that do to our physiology? How unhealthy does it make us, and in which ways?
Great. This is, I think, a very important question because we don't realize what we are doing. See, every single thing we eat, and in fact, I'm going to break this into signals because that's important. See, food for us is taste, food for us is comfort from the point of perception. But biologically, food is nothing but a signal, right? So your body is going to break any carb, whether it is coming from whole wheat, whether it's coming from maida, whether it's coming from a fried food, whether it's coming from a label that says healthy multigrain, it doesn't matter. Your body is going to break it into glucose. When you're eating protein, whatever the source of protein may be, if it's a supplement, hopefully a clean supplement, or whether it's a natural food, your body is going to break it into amino acids. When there is a fat, again, hopefully a healthy fat, your body is going to break it into lipids. So your body understands amino acids, glucose, and lipids. Your body doesn't understand I'm having multigrain or I'm having, let's say, a high protein bread, right? So when this comes into your system, what is your system doing with it? Now, the reason I keep coming back to saying we're a very carb heavy diet because we are constantly sending the signal of glucose into our system. The moment glucose enters into your system, your body has to release insulin. Right? We all have heard of these terms. We know what insulin is. We know what glucose is because because of the whole diabetes realm, we've kind of heard these terms. So I hope this is easy for us to understand. But insulin is like the train which carries glucose to the cells that require it for energy. Glucose is definitely the first source of energy for the body.
Right.
But when you require energy, there has to be output, right? If I'm let's say playing a sport, or if I'm going for a run, or even if I'm thinking a lot and I'm really sort of creating something, brain uses a lot of glucose. So when there is a requirement, insulin is going to carry it. When there is no requirement, then your body, which also requires insulin, will carry it. Your liver will do what it does. Your body is going to convert it into fat or triglycerides and then store it, right? And then you see triglyceride levels really rising up, and us wondering, Ki, I don't even eat high cholesterol meals, but you're eating a lot of glucose heavy meals. Your glucose load is really high. So number one is that you see your lipid markers, your triglycerides, and then I'll come to the metabolic or the glucose markers, but this starts to go out of balance. Now, when there is so much input, your body at the end of the day can only store that much glucose. Liver can store only so much glucose that is required for instant energy.
Right.
Your muscles are the largest storage of glucose, by the way. So I'll come to muscles in the end because they one dispose glucose really well and they can use it for instant energy. So they don't send it anywhere else. They're very hungry for glucose. So other than that, everything else is going to get converted to triglycerides and fat. So now there is even more excess glucose. Your liver literally becomes fatty because of this and not because of the fat in the food. Right? There is a whole signaling cascade effect, which I'll not bore you with, but just to put it very simply, what happens is when the body thinks that it needs to create energy and it's not getting enough glucose, it starts to release fatty acids from the adipose tissue or the fat on our belly, right?
Right.
Or fat in general, but largely fat on our belly. And this goes to the liver. The liver then converts it into glucose. Now, when there is consistent glucose coming in the system, the insulin is constantly being released. Imagine this: you are busy in a meeting, and I am just calling you back to back, and I don't stop calling you.
Right.
Okay, eventually, what are you going to do? You're either going to put your phone on DND or you're going to block me.
Correct.
See, बात ही
Totally.
बात करेंगे. I'll unblock her later, maybe if I like her enough. That's exactly what our body does. The insulins are going and knocking on the cell doors again and again. Take some glucose, and the cell is like, I don't need it. I don't have any requirement to create energy right now. So it blocks the insulin. It literally becomes insulin resistant. And
Ah.
that is what insulin resistance is, that the body is releasing insulin, the insulin is rising, but the cells are not responding to it. Now, when the cells continue to not respond, the liver is working really hard to store the excessive glucose. There is a little bit of a confusion that happens in the body. Because cells are not taking glucose, because they've become insulin resistant, liver is storing. The body seems to think while it's getting a lot of glucose, maybe I need to still give the liver another source of energy. So the fatty acid or the fatty cells are still continuing to push out the free fatty acids, and the liver is still converting that into more glucose. So this
Oh my
creates
God.
such a cascading effect that you end up with a fatty liver. You end up with insulin risen, and slowly then glucose starts to rise. That's why years of insulin resistance leads to diabetes, because there is this whole confusion cascading effect that happens in the system. Other thing, sorry for the lengthy answer, but
No,
the
no.
other thing that happens is you understand that dopamine, we spoke about, food releases dopamine, specifically sugar, right? Unfortunately, sugar is as bad as any drug. It's addictive because it directly triggers dopamine. Now, unfortunately for our body, any reward that isn't earned with hard work is addictive. So, when you're eating sugar, it's an instant release of dopamine. Your body feels this was very easy. Usually, I have to walk up 100 stairs or I have to really work on a project to win something, and then I get this amount of dopamine. This I got with one bite. So, I want more. I want more of this dopamine. And then it triggers the signal saying, eat more of this food because I'm getting more
Ah,
dopamine.
right.
And then you eat more of that food and then you get the same dopamine release. Now, I'm just giving you simple reductive points to make it easy to understand. Now, let's say this much dopamine is getting released with every bite of sugar, right? Just for ease of understanding. Every time the brain is getting this much dopamine, finally it becomes insensitive, right? It's going to now not respond to this much dopamine anymore. So now it wants a little bit more.
Right.
So now it's now
Dil
again
mange
asking,
more. We are always like this.
exactly, they'll mange more. So you're like, okay, this ice cream was really good, but now it's not giving me the same reward. So have more of it. And then this whole cascading effect of consistently eating because we are chasing that reward system.
Right.
You see this addiction cycle. Food is the biggest drug. We only talk about drug abuse. It really is specifically the kind of food that we're now eating because you're actually just chasing that dopamine reward. So that's the second thing that happens. So this is the metabolic piece we spoke about. Now the dopamine release is this whole addictive cycle that we've created. Also, by the way, when you're addicted to sugar and dopamine sensitivity reduces, other things are happening. Hormonal imbalance happens because prolactin starts going up. For women, you also get pushed into anovulation. Anyway, insulin resistance does that. I'll not go too much into that, but those are sort of peripheral things that are happening. And that's why PCOS is very deeply linked to insulin resistance. But that is one thing that's happening. More importantly, your neurotransmitter synthesis, your ability to focus, your ability to have a good balanced mood. All of this slowly starts to go out of balance because dopamine is also it's a neurotransmitter, right? It's a happy hormone. Exactly like that, you have your serotonin, you have your new epinephrine. So there's a lot that gets synthesized. That entire cycle starts to go out of order. The third thing that happens is growth hormones. When you're sleeping, your body releases majority of the growth hormone. Of course, when you're exercising, it happens too, but largely when you're sleeping. Growth hormone for women is very important for metabolic flexibility. For men, of course, it has its anabolic sort of response, right? It helps with muscle building, it helps with strength, etc. For women also it does, but more so for metabolic flexibility. So women always worry ki growth hormone, will I become bulky like a man? You won't. You'll become more metabolically flexible. Now, growth hormone, the antagonist is insulin. When there is insulin in the system, body is not going to release growth hormone. So if you're having a late night binge, that very tasty dessert just before sleeping, you are completely shutting down growth hormone. Now, growth hormone not only metabolic flexibility and anabolic response, but also repair and recovery.
Very important, yes.
We are a machine, right? And I like to say this: imagine you have a beautiful car you've bought, your dream car you've got, and now you're just driving it consistently, non-stop. Can you do it without fuel, without repair?
No, you can't.
That's exactly what we're doing when we're grazing.
Right.
Right? Because not only are we not giving our digestive systems a break, but we are not even letting our body repair when we are sleeping.
Hmm.
Because insulin is so high, glucose is floating in the system, growth hormone is not going to get released. Eventually, the circadian rhythm or the clock of your cells is going to get completely disrupted. So, the cascading effect is so large that I've only given you glimpses of certain pieces that is happening. But unfortunately, this one small habit throws everything off.
Okay, I was just wondering. Snacking is bad, but are there like good snacks and bad snacks? And, what's the difference? I mean, what are good snacks? I'm
Fair.
still trying to
Okay.
make my case.
You're still trying to find something you can munch on.
Yeah.
Fair. So, okay, I'm going to say one thing, but then I'll explain this more. So, one of the best snacks that I love is just graze on carrots.
Ah.
It's a fabulous vegetable, right? It's sort of not going to give you an insulin response. But other than that, that's a joke that I say become a rabbit. But other than that, see, yes, there are good snacks and bad snacks, right? I mean, the bad snacks, everything I spoke about, which is what we are doing, which is the glucose load rising or the heavy glucose load snacks that we unfortunately have become addicted to, all of them come under the bad snack bucket. More importantly,
Which
before I
also,
talk
I'm
about,
sorry to interrupt, which also
yes,
includes a lot of processed food, right? Which we are literally loading on.
absolutely. Absolutely. I was just going to come to that. That before I talk about the good snacks, exactly like you said, the easier the food is available, exactly like the dopamine release. If it comes without hard work, it is bad for you. Right? I'm not saying I want you to spend hours in the kitchen cooking, but if it is coming from two, three ingredients in the fridge that you are aware of, it's still healthier than a huge list on the label, which half of it you cannot pronounce.
Yes.
And more importantly, the universe that we live in, right? If you look at the front of the label, it's so misleading.
Yes.
I love looking at the label of foods that say no added sugar. And then you read the label, it will invariably have maltodextrin, which is as bad, if not worse, than sugar.
Hmm.
Ultimately, sugar is not the enemy, right? What the glucose is doing in the system is the enemy. So whatever name you give it, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And that's exactly what we are missing. So if it's processed, if it's packaged, it is definitely a bad snack. There is no doubt about it.
So
Good
what's
snack,
one? Yeah.
yeah, no, a good snack. Anything that is single ingredient to three ingredients that you can make in your own kitchen, or you know what it is, you can name it, is a good snack. But largely, going back to the 30-30-40 rule, what you want a snack to do is what you want a meal to do. You want to get all three macronutrients. You want to get protein, you want to get good fats, and you want to get a decent amount of healthy carbs, right? Not easy, where the body doesn't have to work hard and sugar spike carbs. So things like a Greek yogurt or even a homemade yogurt, even paneer, or if you eat eggs, then eggs, soaked nuts and seeds. All of these are such wonderful snacks. One of my favorites I'm going to go back to is carrot sticks and a bowl of homemade hummus. It's
Ah.
genuinely tasty. And sometimes you can use soy or you can use edamame seeds, right? Because they give you good amounts of protein. And it's so easy to make. You just soak it, you boil it, you blend it, and you have a nice sauce with whatever vegetable sticks that you want. Even if you don't like vegetable sticks, you can make beetroot crispies at home. We have a lot of these air fryers, etc. Now it doesn't take too much work, but that little bit of work is good because you're earning your reward.
Yes, yes. So you had spoken about genes, right? How we are more genetically predisposed to diabetes and visceral fat and all of that. So again, since you're also a biohacking coach, does snacking sort of switch off any longevity genes? I was wondering, I had read somewhere that, it tweaks your genes a bit, does it?
So I'll quickly explain genetics and epigenetics one more time, so that we kind of understand when I talk about what switches, or what kind of habits switch on or switch off genes. So genetics is the blueprint that we are born with, right? We've inherited this. This is largely fixed. It's not something that we can change. So there's no modulation or changing that's happening with the genes that we are born with. But just like all of the applications in your phone, not every application is running at every given point in time, right? Exactly like that in our system, every DNA code is not constantly on. What code will get switched on, what code will get switched off is decided by something known as epigenomics, right? There's another way of looking at it. See, every DNA strain in our body has one code, right? So the cell that becomes the eye, the cell that becomes the liver has the same code. But epigenomic is like a bookmark, which tells that cell, okay, start reading the DNA from here. So you are an eye cell, you're a liver cell.
Ah.
Now, that epigenomic code is malleable to a large extent. That means we can change that to a large extent. So, how the gene expresses itself, or which gene or which code remains dormant, or which application is now turned on our phone, is decided by these epigenomic levers. One of the largest lever is, or the lever of epigenomics, is your food, what you eat. Lifestyle influences epigenomics to a very, very large extent. Now, of course, there is exercise, there's sleep, there's mental, emotional health, the kind of relationships that we are in, how passionate or excited we are. But the big foundation, so I look at it as a pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid, which is the largest one, is your food, your diet. So, exactly like you said, your diet influences not just from a longevity standpoint, from everything to do with inflammation, diseases, your neurotransmitter synthesis, the rest of your health layout, and how you're aging. It influences the epigenomic expression of your genes or the DNA that you're born with. I'm going to give you one of my examples. I have a FTO gene variant, right, which is in simple words called the obesity gene. So, which means that somebody with that genetic susceptibility is very prone to not getting satiety signals, right? So, from that perspective, somebody like me or with this gene is very prone to binge eating because the signals of satiety are sort of dormant, right? And then, of course, how we process food, etc., is slightly different. That's why it's known as the obesity gene because they're likely to be obese. Now, by just making small changes in my diet, so I follow the functional medicine realm, have about 2 to 2.2 grams per kg of my ideal body weight of protein every day. Because, fantastic studies, and I'll actually share the study with you. It's a great read, which kind of makes this gene expression dormant just because your protein intake goes high. Right. So I make those changes in my diet so that the satiety signals are buffered or given some sort of strength, right? In general, by the way, I've seen this. I'm just digressing for a second. I'm going to come back to your question, but I've recently been looking at the data of all the perimenopausal women that I have worked with, right? And I'm putting together this case report. It's very interesting because what it shows me is that while we only talk about ovarian output changes, we talk about how estrogen changes or how progesterone changes. What has been very interesting for me to see, every single woman between 35 and 60 that I have worked with, they have entered perimenopause in a situation of metabolic imbalance, in a situation of reduced anabolic reserve. So, things like insulin resistance, things like triglyceride being high, things like their DHEAS or their testosterone, the anabolic reserve, which is very important from the standpoint of this transition, are all blunted. They've been underfueled, overeating, chronically stressed, and metabolically compromised before they enter perimenopause. What perimenopause is doing is just exaggerating years of underfueling that women have gone through. And then we think it's because of menopause, but menopause is just exaggerating those years of, I'm not going to use the word damage, just not knowing how to approach your health.
Right.
Right. And that is exactly why you see that for a lot of women in India, perimenopause hits you like a brick.
Oh, yes.
So, in fact, I want to share an example since I've been talking about perimenopausal women so much. So, multiple cases like this, but I want to share one particular case, which I've also created a case report for. She came in with, of course, a perimenopausal woman, came in with hypothyroidism, hadn't started thyroid medication yet, absolute habits of binge eating because consistent craving couldn't stop herself from eating, and extreme fatigue to the point where while she was eating constantly, but she was feeling very, very tired. When I looked at the biomarkers, I recognized two things that were very, very apparent. Exactly what we were talking about, right? Overfeeding, but undernourished.
Ah,
What I needed to fix was give her enough protein and fix all of the micronutrients, everything from the ferritin levels to the vitamin D levels to the magnesium levels. That's literally what I did. And in fact, we had a discussion where somebody had asked her to go on thyroid medication, and I asked her to hold because I recognized that this state of overfeeding and undernourishment was causing hypothyroid, and hypothyroid was not a thyroid gland issue. And I had to convince her, and I said, give me 4 to 6 weeks, and we'll see. If it doesn't improve, then you go on medication. 6 weeks in, actually slightly lesser than weeks in, thyroid became almost normal. Binge eating completely disappeared and energy levels started to improve significantly. All I did was fix the nutrition. I didn't even do a calorie deficit, didn't ask the person to reduce the eating habits. I just fixed the nutrition. Enough protein, enough micronutrients. So some supplementation, changing the way the plate looks or what the meal plan looked like. And that simple shift made such a huge difference. And in fact, I'd love for you to hear her experience from her.
Yeah, so my journey from perimenopausal point of view, I would really like to share because I was dealing with a lot of things which were like now quite accepted in me that this is how my life is gonna be. I was dragging my life. मुझे ये नहीं पता था that there is another way to live life. Rather, I used to be in awe of people that, how they're so chirpy, how they're so lively, but I'm dragging myself for anything good or bad in my life. So basically, I happened to meet, I'm really fortunate to meet Tanya. And she started step by step. First, she had told me to start with protein, which I was really reluctant in taking. But तान्या का good part was she has her own Insta handle जिसपे उन्होंने बार-बार videos में ये डाला that it is not only for gymmers and it is for all of us. They are the building blocks and we must have. एंड जो प्रोटीन हमें बेसिक फूड से मिलता है वो सफाइज नहीं करता हमारी बॉडी नीड बिकॉज उसमें कार्ब पोर्शन बहुत हाई होता है. So she pushed me to have protein. And once I started taking, I realized that मेरे को बहुत ज़्यादा binge eating issue था. Like एक कमरे से दूसरे कमरे में जाना, बीच में डाइनिंग टेबल है, कुछ स्नैक निकनैक रखा है, तो I have to have that. Then going to my mom in law's room, अगर वो कुछ खा रहे हैं तो उनके साथ खा लिया, किचन में गए फिर कुछ खा लिया. So continuously I used to be eating. And in terms of my main meal, अभी ब्रेकफास्ट किया वो कर रही हूँ बट मुझे टेंशन है मुझे लंच में क्या खाना है, लंच कर रही हूँ मुझे टेंशन है मुझे डिनर में क्या खाना है. एंड मीठा भी खाना है मुझे जरूर खाना है, सॉल्ट भी खाना है. ओनली थिंग इज आई वाज लिविंग टू ईट एंड माय बॉडी वाज ऑलवेज लेजी. द बेस्ट पार्ट इन वेरी फर्स्ट मंथ व्हाट आई फेल्ट, बिंज ईटिंग खत्म हो गई, शुगर क्रेविंग खत्म हो गई, आई बिकेम एक्टिव. I was looking forward to go to work and start doing my exercises, which अंदर का कोना कहता था बट माय बॉडी वाज नेवर रेडी टू डू. मुझे लोगों को देख के लगता था कि वो कैसे इतनी डिसिप्लिन लाइफ जीते हैं, मैं भी चाहती थी. आई वाज गेटिंग आउट ऑफ शेप डे बाय डे बट मैं कर नहीं पाती थी. सो प्रोटीन ने मेरे को एनर्जी दी है, प्रोटीन ने मेरी बिंज ईटिंग खत्म कराई है, फीलिंग ऑफ सेटेटेड फीलिंग मेरे को होने लग गई. एंड बेसिकली जो एक होता था नहाने धोने में और मॉर्निंग चोर्स में मैं इतनी टायर्ड हो जाती थी दैट माय रेस्ट ऑफ द डे यूज्ड टू बी ऑन बेड. बट सिंस आई स्टार्टेड टेकिंग प्रोटीन आई एम नॉट बीइंग ऑन बेड एट ऑल.
That was such an eye opener, Tanya. I mean, there must be so many women going through the exact same, constant snacking symptoms during perimenopause and then going on to have mental health issues because of that.
Shrirupa, the number of women who come to me beyond 35 who are on supplement on medication for depression, SSRIs, because of all of these years of underfueling, overeating. It's almost to the point where I have started becoming rather worried about how do we change how we look at our bodies, how do we look at our health, how do we look at our eating habits to understand that not only from a DNA standpoint, but even something dysfunctional, your metabolic markers, your anabolic markers are going to change because of the way that you're eating. Then coming to the longevity DNA, or the genetic expression that you were talking about. So we do require fuel, there is no doubt about it, but more than fuel we require nutrition. Right kinds of nutrition is going to trigger mTOR pathways, which are required for sort of becoming stronger, building muscle, lot of the fabulous things that happen. But we also, like we started out saying, we're not grazing animals. We require fasted windows so that the AMPK pathways, the NAT plus pathways, everything that's required for the repair, the regeneration, even the autophagy pathways, which will do the cleaning up that needs to happen in the system so that we can live healthier and we can live longer. That can only happen when we are not digesting.
Right.
Right? Digestion is energy expensive. So when we are digesting, we cannot repair and recover at the same time. So yes, while I wouldn't say exactly that it switches off longevity, sort of genetic expression, but it takes away from it because it's so busy doing basics of digestion and fighting the battle of insulin resistance that you have no time for autophagy and AMPK. So we are meant to have fasted windows, and that is one of the biggest drivers of longevity.
Mhm. Which brings me to my last question: intermittent fasting. Does intermittent fasting sort of help reset our metabolism, as we say it? And if it does help us reset our metabolism, is it for everyone? Is it like a one size fits all formula, or is it again specific to people?
I'm glad you already asked me that if it's a one size fits all. I'm going to answer that first. And nothing in health is a one size fits all. The reason why functional medicine and biohacking exist is because we recognize nothing is a one size fits all. We have to take bioindividuality into consideration. Very theoretically, intermittent fasting is a fabulous tool. It really, really supports metabolic, I don't even say reset, just flexibility, right? It helps with the agility that our metabolism should have to be able to switch between fuel sources, to be able to create the energy and distribute the energy that we require. We seldom think about metabolism from an energy standpoint, but ultimately, what are we eating for? We're eating for that only, that the system has energy, not just the external energy to move our body, but also internally to be able to do the functions that the systems are meant to do. That also requires energy. But the reason intermittent fasting works is because when we have a fasted window, when the body is not busy digesting, it has the ability to focus on repair, recovery, autophagy, the cleaning of the house, right? So, for example, when you're not entertaining people at home, is when you can actually do the cleaning of the house.
Right.
You obviously can't be cleaning the house when you have guests sitting over there.
Right.
Right? That's exactly what it is. Food is inside, the body is busy digesting, it cannot do the cleaning of the system. From that perspective, fasted windows are important. Where it actually backfires is when you are in a situation of high stress. Now, when I say high stress, I don't just mean mental stress. Stressors are also fabulous for us, right? Workout is a stress. We know how it's great for us. Some amounts of mental or perceived stress is also good, but chronic stress, specifically when you see it in your biology, when there is adrenal fatigue. I see people who come in with tanked anabolic reserves or the DHEAS, testosterone, both men and women are completely low. Women require testosterone too, by the way, right? That's a
Right.
conversation I love having. But when that is completely tanked or really low, but your morning cortisol is shooting up, the wired but tired state that we feel ourselves being in, that I'm so tired but my brain cannot shut down, but I still can't sleep. That is chronic stress, or if you've been in that state for a long period of time, because your central nervous system has two situations, right? One is the sympathetic, which is nothing to do with sympathy, but the fight or flight mode, where it cannot differentiate between a lion chasing you or a project that you need to complete in the next 2 hours. For your body, the stress response is the same. But when you get stuck there, when you get stuck in this high cortisol, because cortisol is pushing glucose in the bloodstream because it thinks you need to either fight or flight. So you need energy. So when you're stuck there, then you can't come into the other side, which is the parasympathetic mode, where the rest, recovery, regeneration, the actual building up of the system, the cleaning of the house happens. In that state, if you do fasting or extended periods of fast, your body perceives that as a threat,
Ah.
right? Because it is almost an added stress. So, for that phenotype, intermittent fasting really backfires because your body very quickly moves into a catabolic state, eating itself.
Ah.
Second, when there are real hormonal imbalances, when there is, and this is something I see very common in India, when there is hypothyroidism, right? When there is PCOS. So, when your hormones are out of balance, your body is already telling you something is not working, that there is fuel that is missing, there is micronutrient that is missing, it needs more protein. Now, when it is telling you that and you go into a fasted state or extreme calorie deficit, your body is again going to think it's under threat because it is a added stressor. So these are certain phenotypes where it doesn't work. Of course, goes without saying when a woman is pregnant, that of course you're literally creating life, so you require a lot more resources. You can't go into a fasted mode. So barring those pieces, and of course when there is a chronic disease, right? Again, anything your body is already fighting, you can't put it under additional stress.
Right.
But what still works, and even if somebody is sort of going through a process of healing through certain imbalances, I like to use a slightly different term, which is time restricted eating rather than intermittent fasting. And the reason I do this because I recognize people have also started abusing intermittent fasting, right? I see a lot of people on extreme fasted windows for almost like a daily life. It's every day. It's not supposed to be every day. You can do an extreme fasted window, but do it in a cyclic manner. You've also got to feed yourself, and then you've got to, and when I say feed, you've got to nourish yourself. Let me use that word. You don't have to graze, you have to
Yes.
nourish yourself. But at the same time, then you also can give yourself a break. That's fine. But time restricted eating works wonderfully almost on a daily basis, where all you do is give yourself that 3 hour gap between dinner and sleep.
Right.
Why do you do that? Because, like I said, you don't want insulin to be high when you're sleeping, so growth hormone can get released. That one little change usually works in 90% of the cases, and it does wonders because you're giving your system the break from digestion. You're giving your system a clean terrain to be able to regenerate, repair, do all of the autophagy work, the cleaning of the house work, and wake up in the morning with absolute output of sleep that sleep is required to do. So a lot of us feel that we've slept, but sleep requires to do a lot of regeneration. Second, when you wake up in the morning, you can prolong that fasted window by just having protein and fat for your breakfast. So you're just feeding your amino acid pool. And this is largely true for perimenopausal women. Men can do with just maybe a little bit of fat in the morning. For women, also fueling the amino acid pool with some healthy fat, and then prolong that a little bit more and then have a full meal. This works better. I call this a functional time restricted eating. So it's not a fasted state where you are again putting your body under stressor, stripping it off of nourishment, but at the same time you're timing it correctly so that you're letting it heal, but you're also giving it what it requires when it wakes up in the morning. And of course, hydration, right? Hydration is something we don't talk about. So hydration is allowed at all points in time, but food, of course, time restricted eating is something that works much better.
Thanks so much, Tanya, for taking that unhealthy snack thought out of our heads. Thank you.
Hopefully,
Thank you. Yes.
hopefully this will work.
Thanks so much.
I'm glad you've picked this topic and we're talking about it. This is super
Yeah.
important for us to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It is. It is.
Thank you so much.
Don't tune out yet. It's time for the nutrition power tip of the week from nutritionist Sangeeta Iyer.
Balance and moderation are usually the most sustainable solutions for appropriate nutrition. Extreme diets often work temporarily because they create an extreme structure or reduce calories or food groups. These diets become difficult to maintain long term. A balanced, effortless way of eating is what usually wins and is sustained by most people.
Thanks for tuning in to the Times of India Health Plus podcast. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or the TOI app. And if you have a health topic you'd like us to discuss, write to us at toihealth.plus@timesofindia.com. Stay healthy and see you next time.